So we have a brief time together, so I think I'm going to get started, try to start right in time. So I'm largely here to, to get acquainted and to better understand what the current student support specialists are up to and to welcome the new ones and to see if we can begin to create a cohort. So my name is Steve Cox. I'm at Northern Mexico College, half an hour north of Santa Fe, half an hour to the side or down the hill from Los Alamos National Labs. I teach engineering. My background was I studied engineering and then mathematics, and then moved into neuroscience. And now these days I feel myself moving into social psychology. That happened because for 10 years my wife and I were college masters in a residential campus, living 24/7 with 300 undergraduates. So we became student support specialists in some capacity. And after that, I moved more or less from academic research into more solidarity building, trying to build cohorts. So I see the student support specialists as the linchpins. So we're working with fragile, underprepared students, and we need to, to be able to work carefully and thoughtfully with them. And I think we also need more support from our administration and the teachers that we're working with. So I'm especially interested in creating those kind of links of trust. So if we're to model trust for our incoming students, it would help if that trust exists within our own campus, across departments and across administrations. And so I have kind of one proposal for how we might go forward doing that, because I also see, coming say from social psychology, there are some amazing interventions that are in some sense easy because they're brief, but in some sense hard because they're brief, because they're subtle if you want to do something briefly and get it done and kind of get out of the way. And there are interventions that are not so easy to do in the classroom that has the baggage or the anxiety of math attached to them. And so I see them as something that could kind of elevate and solidify the role of a student support specialist as contributing across disciplines, not just in engineering, not just in STEM. And so that's kind of what I've got prepared for you. I wasn't prepared for this conference room exactly, so there's no podium, and my machine is plugged into this row here. So I'm going to make, I guess, it might be easy. Gabriel, do you mind being the pusher? Okay, thanks.
I love pushing buttons.
Yeah. And this is also an old yoga machine that is supposed to be totally flexible, but it's right now, if it gets too flexed, it just decides to shut down. Right? So I would ask you to be gentle when you're pushing, Gabriel. Thank you. But you want to just sit here, then you're not.
That seems like a better idea.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think also Dave Gruber mentioned there's some possibility to get into mentoring discussions, because 35 minutes is such a short amount of time. So I chose to kind of focus on one intervention, but for me, mentoring is the silver bullet. And so I'm working in an environment where most of our students come to our college through our GED program. And then I spend a lot of time taking them back into K-12 as role models to get more students coming in as undergraduates. My institution does offer bachelor's degrees, but most of our kids are there for associates. So I would definitely like to talk a whole lot about mentoring, but let's maybe just kind of get into the one focus topic that I have for us, and then we can kind of branch out from there given time. So that's the bigger mantra for me, is just how to work together for student success. This is the first convening of the expansion, so I think it's a chance to put some maybe larger ideas out there. At the same time, maybe I need to preface this with there's lots of responsibilities for the student support specialist. And so at one level, you could just see me as maybe piling on, and that's the last thing that I want to do. That's why I'm hoping we have a conversation for how such interventions might fit into your programs. Okay? So I'm here to solidify and to build trust, not just to add one more thing to the job description of the student support specialist. Okay? So Gabriel. A couple more perhaps. So where are we going? Yeah, so that's more or less the thrust must instructors meet only academic content needs, and the student support specialist does the rest. So in trying to build trust across the administration, academia, and student life, I think you guys are the hubs. So, so I have a notion of how one can begin to have a conversation, and I just want to share that with you and to get feedback. So next slide. So the preamble, I think I've already given you the preamble by my wandering around. So it's largely just setting the stage that you guys have the chance to do things that cut across particular courses or particular disciplines. Yeah. So I think I've made this point. I'll make it again on the final slides. So my hope is to better connect faculty to the institution and better connect student support specialists to the institution and then better connect student support specialists to faculty. And I don't think that comes from just chatting or by having a pamphlet, or a workshop. I think it happens by having a common problem to work on together. And that's what I want to talk about today. Okay? So next one, Gabriel. So that the common problem comes from attribution theory. So I'll first lay out a rationale and then give you the 3 dimensions. And for visual thinkers, if there's time, we can have a build out. We can actually build some attributional octahedra to keep track of the different dimensions of attribution theory. And the reason I think it's important for us today is that there are now trusted protocols for making this happen. And so I said that they're easy and they're hard. In the sense, they're easy because they're brief, and they're hard because they're subtle. And so how can a brief thing really work? So I'll try to get into literature on why this stuff works. Who should lead the way? The answer is you, and then I'll try to leave you with a few key references. Okay? So the rationale behind attribution theory. So the basic question is, to what do you, and when I say you, I mean us, but I typically mean our students. To what does a student attribute their failure or success? What is the story that they tell? Who caused it? What caused it? So there's a body of literature in social psychology going back to the 50s on attribution theory. I'll give you the fundamental reference at the end. So this observation that my attribution of a cause is a better predictor of my future behavior than the actual result of failure or success. So it's not somehow what happens to you, it's the story you tell to save yourself. Our self is this very fragile thing, and we all make up stories that explain, especially our failures. So this notion in the larger type, right, that it's our stories, it's our explanations of our failure that have a greater predictive and therefore learning power than the events themselves. So at some level, lots of psychology is like, duh, of course that's the way, but it's a subtle thing to somehow lift this observation and help people change the way they tell stories. Okay? You can't tell someone face to face, stop smoking, lose weight, change your attitude. It has to be a much more subtle. The authors here argue for kind of psychological engineers. Is that what a student support specialist is? Or are they learning coaches? I don't want to put you in the place of lying to students. But I think as parents and also half-time psychologists, we do know that we have to kind of tell the truth somehow slantwise for it to really to have an impact. Okay? But that's basically the goal. Was that final bullet? I mean, so can we find ways to change the way students perceive their success or failure? So again, it's a big mandate. So it helps to have a little taxonomy. So what are the ways that we tell stories about our successes and failures? What are the important variables? Okay. So Gabriel, so it began, of course, kind of slowly in the 40s and 50s, and by now there's kind of wide agreement that there's 3 dimensions in the way we tell stories, the way we attribute blame or blessing, on how we did or how we did not perform something. So the first one, and probably the most obvious one, is just internal. So if internal means it's my fault, external means something else happened. So there's a couple examples. Internal might mean I'm bad at math. And external say that the teacher didn't teach us. So we hear, we hear students leaving the classroom saying, both of these things to one another. So internal versus external is a very easy, easy dichotomy. The next dichotomy is involving time. So a stable attribution is something that is the same every time, and again, versus unstable. And stable meaning, I'm too short, there's probably not much that's going to not much to change that, other than robotics and prosthetic engineering and the like. And unstable is, I didn't have the right equipment at the time. And the theory, of course, goes way beyond just academic excellence, academic failure and success. It moves into the arts, into music, into sports, in that analogy. So then the final dimension is one that's whether it's controllable, under my control, versus uncontrollable. So controllable is I didn't get enough sleep. And again, so whose fault is that exactly? While, an uncontrollable one are these, I don't know, at my campus I get this every week. Someone is losing a friend or a relative. So that's something that's out of their control while they're handing in a piece of homework or doing a test. And so that's maybe kind of a long list. The psychological literature is full of tables and examples. I think the best examples are the ones that you kind of generate yourself for trying to get your head around these ways of thinking. Okay? And different students, are choosing different stories for their successes, largely their failures. And it's up to us to try to understand how to move them back into the adaptive way of telling stories. So the sweet spot we're looking for are in each of these dimensions. We want it to be internal. Their failure, they have the power to change their failure. So they must internalize that. So the first one is to not be an external cause. It should be internal. Second, it should not be stable. It should be unstable. So saying that I suck at math, that should not be a stable indicator of failure. Right? If learning can happen, and we need to convince them, say through growth mindset, that learning can happen. So being bad at math is not a stable cause, it's unstable. They can do something about it. And likewise, we need it to be controllable. So what can you do about it? I mean, you can learn more math. You can take advantage of more resources that a student sports specialist can hook them up with. Okay, so our job, our job, if you wish to accept this as a proposal, right, is to move our students towards these adaptable mindsets, where their cause of failure is seen as internal, unstable, meaning it's not fixed in time, and controllable, literally under their control. Okay? And so there's now been 30 years of laboratory as well as field experience with a very brief protocol that takes C students to B students after just one intervention in this attributional retraining. And it has gigantic increments in retention. Okay? And I'll talk a little bit about why that might be the case. But first, I'm not sure, I don't think I've got, this was our first convening, so getting so many folks here. I can put a copy of this on I'll share this with the slide deck and the like. So I built for the geometric and, geometrically gifted, or just to kind of maybe something to do before lunch. I had trouble, bringing 50 pair of scissors with me on the airplane. So I did bring some straight edges. We can do some cutting, and I got lots of glue sticks. But even to something to do with your students. So this is a handout. Well, let me just give a few per row. Okay, can we just do that? Yes. Can share them for now. I can make more copies probably before we go. I don't know. So watching my kids grow up and living with 300 college students, I often got the opinion that people were often making up these stories almost on the fly. And so if we fold this thing properly, we'll get an octahedron. An octahedron is something with how many sides? 8, yeah. And why 8? Yeah, so I've got 3 dimensions, and each of those dimensions only have 2 possibilities. So it's 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. And so upon building this, it's a 3-dimensional solid. You can roll it. It's an octahedral die. And you'll come up with a face, right? And the face might say unstable, internal, and uncontrollable. And so you think to yourself, and so what are those three ways of telling the story? And we can do a little bit of coloring to try to get the magic face. We can even weight the die, if you wish, to make that thing kind of always show up in our students' explanations. So for me, it's just some kind of visual aid to hold on to the theory. The theory is not that complex, but when 3 things can be moving at once, and the argument among psychologists, they give careful examples for why these 3 dimensions really are independent. Right? This internal versus external is different than stable versus unstable, which is different than controllable versus uncontrollable. So I have some more of these, but I think in the interest of time, we're probably not going to get to building of these. Say again?
Do you have a finished version?
I did, but I didn't make it through security. I mean, it's not. Sorry, so a little smashed. And yeah, so I thought I might do that before seeing you guys. So maybe I'll definitely build one over lunch, and hopefully this is a discussion we maybe continue over lunch as well. So I'm going to be a table leader for table. I don't have the number in front of me, but I'll tell you. Okay, is it 2? Table 2? Okay. So I think generating your own examples will help you kind of decide whether this way of thinking, this way of telling stories is meaningful for you and for the students that you're working with. Okay, so Gabriel, next slide, please. So since there is this field literature and lab literature that says that it works, then the more applied social learning theorists have generated a retraining curricula. With the goal, as I mentioned before, we want to get students to adopt adaptive attributions. That the reason they failed was internal and can be changed over time and is under their control. Okay? So just really briefly, the components, and I'll give you a detailed reference for this protocol at the end. So it begins with a pre-assessment via self-report questionnaire, which hopefully has no test anxiety baggage attached to it, right? Just learning about each other and how we tell stories. And then, fortunately, because they're in school, this is going to happen. They're in their first semester, they will have a success/failure in whatever we choose as kind of the right thing to measure, to get feedback on. They're going to have first math test and English essay. They take public speaking, so something's going to happen, and with those dimensions or more. I'm just kind of giving small examples. So next, Gabriel. And so once a success or a failure has happened, a story is now being told. It's in the mind. And now it's time for the subtle part, this attributional retraining induction. How do we really bring about this change in mindset? Okay? And this is, again, this is the subtle part, and it's not typically going to happen by a handout or a lecture, right? Or a declarative statement, do better next time. I mean, it just doesn't work. And so the key method that's been used across the country is to produce, and again, I would go so far as to argue that we should produce one for STEM Core. The ones I've seen are a little bit cheesy and don't exactly fit the demographic of my college. But the key idea is a attributional retraining videotape where your freshman or sophomore is watching sophomores or upperclassmen talk about the first few tests that they took at your institution and how it blew their mind. They weren't ready on a number of levels, but they were able to get help, to realize that hard work changed things. So they're modeling all the adaptive qualities we want to see. They're modeling the student choosing to take an internal responsibility for failure of a test, for choosing to say that their failure was not stable, they are going to succeed, and finally that it was under their control. So they're seeing upperclassmen who are just like them, who are arguing they came not prepared, and they did something about it. So that slight, maybe not so subtle message, since I've been hammering at you guys with it, but the students do not see this as a psychological intervention for kids that are failing. They don't. Yes?
Does it have to be a videotape? I know many of our cohorts currently bring in alums to say, a year ago I was taking algebra and failing, and now I got an internship or whatever, right? So
right.
Is it something about the video?
No, there's not. Yeah. So it's there are a number of times it can be live. It can be. I think these folks are trying to scale it, right? So trying to have it so it's not so easy to bring in kind of authentic actors that can do the right thing with a video. You've got a few takes to get this. But for sure, I think, especially in the beginning, experimenting, it'd be nice to bring in alums. And then that is a common thing. Training the alums to not come on too strong, is an issue. So that's a fascinating detail. So there's lots of, I should say there's a couple other bars, other ways to do this. It can even be done, over the web in some, say, larger institutions. So that the fourth and penultimate step is this AR so attributional retraining consolidation. So getting them to internalize, right? So more or less, what you say is what you believe. So getting the student to actually take some lesson out of this and again, there's lots of different models for doing that. So by discussion, by writing exercise, or even by an aptitude test. What we do want them to see is that aptitude is this flexible thing. You can learn to improve your aptitude for anything. And then finally, in order to see, to measure whether this thing's having the impact that the literature says that it has, just some post-assessment via self-report questionnaire or even through grades. So like I said, the common occurrence is, the common average number is to raise kids about 0.27 to 0.35 grade point average, independent of discipline, right? With a gigantic improvement on retention. So I think I can maybe speak to a little bit of how that works, just really briefly. So this one thing that it must be brief and must be indirect. So this is the subtlety, and this is then also the part where it's not so easy to do this in a classroom setting. So brief in the sense that there's this amazing literature that kids respond better to a 5-minute anti-binge drinking video as opposed to a 50-minute anti-binge drinking video, right? People know when they're being hectored and when they're being lectured. And we need to be kind of cognizant of that. So the construction of these things, so that 5-part protocol typically takes place over the first year of your students' involvement at your college. And each one of those is a very, very brief, interaction. I find too invasive a word. So it can be invasive for the college teacher. So I see myself as a teacher rather than student support specialist. But as someone who has more informal meetings with their students, it is possible to convey each of those pieces without being intrusive or invasive, without telling them, you, my dear, need help, right? So it's through the cause of your, or the course of your year together, you can deliver these brief but subtle and largely indirect. You're not lecturing them. You're not telling them that they've been singled out for special treatment. So I think those are all things that I'm largely saying in that second paragraph. And so then how does it really work? Because in fact, the data is really clear. And there's even, for me, the most surprising part of the data is that the kids that have been helped the most think that those 5 things in the protocol had nothing to do with their success. So that's an indication that it was really well done. It was done kind of indirectly. It wasn't like someone boosted me up and then all of a sudden I knew what to do. No, they did it themselves. They're not giving any credit to the social learning theorists. So it's believed to work through this sequence of positive reinforcements. So by taking responsibility for their failures, again, they fail less often, and they begin to look more like the upperclassmen that they saw in the video. They get more respect from their peers, from their professors, and that just leads to a greater self-image which leads to greater learning and less failure. That's a pretty generic explanation, right? It's a very subtle effect. So that's good, Guy Brooks. I don't have a ton more time, so keep pushing. Yeah, so the how should lead the way. So I meant that should be who should lead the way. Sorry about that. Yeah, so there was a lot of hand-wringing in the applied psychology literature about how to bring these insights to scale. And it's not just these. There are similar brief interventions on stereotype threat, brief interventions, on kind of growth over fixed mindset. And so and there's also lots of famous failures of taking these things to scale. So for sure, context matters. But I think a lot of places aren't as gifted as STEM Core is in having student support specialists as these linchpins that can really communicate between administration and faculty and students. So I see all as a laboratory for taking such things to scale. Again, it's not a magic bullet. In fact, there's quite a lot of literature saying that magic bullets actually have these negative connotations, saying that they're just seem to be magic and they can't possibly work for my students. So it's going to take some care and some reflection and some conversation. But that's my proposal. Is that again, there's the hand-wringing happens because this is hard really to do in the classroom when no matter how good the teacher is, there's baggage. And there's also amazing data that shows that quality teaching does not move learning for kids who don't have the right attributions for their failure. Okay? So they do not respond to better teaching. So it's a difficult place to put, for a teacher that I think I can communicate with anybody, and then I see this data, and I see the students in front of me, that it's just not happening. So that's where a student support specialist who can actually, move the needle on the students that are most in need. I think the potential is huge. So I'm putting this before you. So I really do see student support specialists, as the hub, and psychology has a model for how to make this happen. Right? So this notion that there is this research practitioner partnership. So the practitioner, perhaps, at a higher education institution, the practitioner might be the teacher, and the researcher is the learning theorist. Most of this learning theory happened right here in the Stanford Education Department. So there's a ton of theory waiting to be implemented. The practitioner is nose to the grindstone, trying to do a better job at getting math to our kind of STEM initiates. And so there's this divide between the theoretical knowledge of the applied psychologist and the math teacher on the ground. And again, you guys know where I'm placing you, right? Right in that center spot, right in the sweet spot, that can take insights from psychology and bring them to kids, struggling, fragile kids across the discipline, and improve their grades, period, not just in math. Okay? So like I said, there's a model for how to make this happen, these research practice partnerships. And the Carnegie Foundation even put together recommendations for community college and how to bring STEM grades and math grades up. And part of that strategy is a few of these social psychology interventions, attributional retraining being one of them. And so I'm really not coming with not many new ideas, just a challenge to exploit your expertise without trying to overburden. So maybe there's things you're trying already, and I would love to hear about these things. Or I would love to begin doing this on a national scale with the 30 colleges that we're currently thinking about. That's that scale. Okay. So there's, like I said, there are already these acronyms. So there are already NICs, these networked improvement communities, because some of us might do it live, some of us might do a videotape, some of us might make a kick-ass videotape. So we need to learn from each other as we experiment with these interventions, and we need to be cognizant, of new theory And the theoreticians, I hope they're not just kind of blowing smoke. They're also interested in improving their theory. And how would they do that? From the data that we're collecting, right? From the kids' lives that we're changing. Okay. So I think, Gabe, sorry?
Is there any literature, at Growth Sector, we've worked really hard to have a student support specialist with every campus that's not outside the classroom, that's inside the classroom, that's meeting individually with students. We think a big part of that is the response time. So first week of class, students that don't show up, fail, they don't come back, right? So having someone that's met with them before the program starts and then calling them right away. Is there something around the timeline here for the attributional retraining kind of 5 points, like after I guess it would be the 3 points after the failed test? I mean, does that stuff all need to happen in the 3 days? Or, we think one of the points to have a student support specialist is that the faculty won't have time to do this. And the Career Center and Tutoring Center are overloaded, so it's got to be the support specialist, right? Is there anything in the literature about the timeline of that?
Yeah. They really do see this as kind of a relaxed rollout. I mean, I know just what you're saying. I mean, I know the at-risk students, timing is super, super important. But for these psychological interventions, they're arguing, that for it to have an impact, it really must be kind of on the students' schedule and on their time frame. They're the ones changing their own mind. So they do really recommend taking this out for the full first year. Yeah, I mean.
So I'm confused. You're not going to show the same video 7 times during 2 semesters, right?
No, you can show it once.
You can show once,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So I think my inclination, and I'm no longer in the classroom, but I started as a support specialist, would be everybody fails, 40% of people fail the first quiz. The tutoring session the next day, I want to show the video. And then follow up with individual appointments around, hey, what's your plan? There's 6 different ways to get tutoring.
Strategies.
So is that us? What I'm hearing from you, is that us pushing too much, or?
No. I think the key is to wait until after that first failure.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and then show it once, right? And then somewhere during that first semester, follow up with the consolidation issue. Right? So you've got induction. That's maybe something's been floated to them. They don't really, hopefully, they don't feel that it's floated down their throat. They just feel it's been floated. That there is this way of that they've watched college students tell stories about their own success. And then getting them to write and reflect in some capacity over the next few weeks. It seems to be enough. Yeah. So the timeline seems a little bit vague. It's it's not so surprising to tell you. One of the key advantages why it works is largely it is kind of student centered. It's not kind of the mind of the therapist or even the mind of the student support specialist about where they're really at. So it's kind of not confusing the brain with the situation. So one of the downsides of responding too quickly is you're thinking the situation is really kind of typical of their whole trajectory, and we're giving them some time to consolidate. But that's not a very precise answer. But so yes.
To follow up with that, I think about the sustainability of the cohort, because in the instance that this happens and the student in their own affirmations and confirmations of their attributions, that could mean that they have fallen off. And because the college has timelines, the college has, periods that they have to maintain.
Yeah.
And so I kind of hear that, and I understand that, because we want to sustain the cohort.
Yeah.
And if the students aren't meeting the requirements for success per the institution, therein lies another issue.
That's good. Yeah. So I can look into notions of acceleration of the of the protocol. Yeah. So I came here talking about creating a cohort of all of us. So for sure, also I'm very sensitive to this notion of kind of fracturing the cohort of incoming students. There was this one first. Yeah.
So in response or in conjunction, piggyback with your questions, could this be done preventively? Could it be done in a summer orientation where you're just sort of preparing them to begin to think about things a little differently, introduce kind of mindset thinking, introduce attribution theory? A lot of them are already coming to us having experienced success and not success in math, chemistry, and physics, right? So the concept could maybe be introduced early on in an orientation.
Yeah, that's a great point. So my reading is that's kind of the stealthy side of this. So when you tell someone the concept, you're actually then immunizing them from actually internalizing the concept. So the more, you know what I'm saying? That's the subtle part of the whole thing. So I think it could be, I mean, we could talk, I want to talk about, you know, how to compress this, for example, into something that happens in the summer, but I think they have to have a failure, and they have to tell a story, and they have to then watch, you know, other people that they respect going through a similar situation. So how to compress that and deliver it so I'm delivering it here to you guys as a concept, but to our students, that's the subtle part of it.
I would imagine that presenting this in the summer before we have a relationship with them about, tell me about failure, might really kind of turn them off to us before they really understand who we are as a support role.
Yeah.
I think it would be a little scary to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it depends. So I came to this literature because the students that as an armchair psychologist, so there's something called learned helplessness. In fact, attribution theory came out of the literature on learned helplessness. And so I do see kind of community colleges as a second chance, but for a lot of the students I'm working with, I mean, they've been failing since 7th grade at any algebra, intervention in some sense. So they're accustomed to failure. So there might be some stigma to talking about failure, but most of them just accept it. That's just, and they have an explanation for why they're failing. So let me take one more.
Yeah, it's also process-oriented related to that.
Mm-hmm.
How important is the writing and reflection as opposed to sharing in a small group, where trust can develop?
Yeah. So I think that consolidation is pretty wide open. There's a number of different avenues by which that happens.
Because some students might have a writing
Yeah.
struggle,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't want that to stop them from just thinking.
From reflecting.
critically.
Right. Yeah. No, so there definitely the group reflection that is in the literature. I can share that with you. So maybe, Gabriel, we can just go. I think that's hopefully the final slide. Yeah. So Bernard Weiner was really the one of the founding fathers of the literature. As far as he's more or less codifying these 3 dimensions, and I'm giving you the cube to kind of get your head around his theory. This is kind of the most practical place to understand the retraining treatment. So these questions about, is it video, is it live, time frame. It's also, again, lots and lots of hand wringing because they notice that it does seem to be subtle, and so it does have to be done with some intention and some forethought, and largely probably in consultation with theorists that have had other experience with things we might be trying to modify. But that's where I took the protocol. In fact, that's also where I took the title of what I talked about today, this kind of fostering engagement. And then there's a beautiful follow-up a few years later, so coming out of Stanford, just on this social psychological interventions in education. This lists half a dozen of them, and I mentioned them to you. So kind of growth mindset, attribution theory, stereotype threat, and kind of expectancy theory. These are all very, very powerful psychological determinants of who we are. It's not like math, where the more math I teach you, the more math you know. The more of this stuff that I teach you, maybe the more I immunize you from understanding how to actually let that work on your own psyche. So they really look into the causes behind kind of the recursive mechanisms that allow positive attributions to lead to a positive feedback and negative attributions to lead to negative feedback. One taking you to success and retention, the other one taking you to failing out quickly. Yeah, and I want to check my time as well. Are we back at 11:25 or 30? I don't want to. 11:25. Yeah. So can I take one more? I don't want to keep you guys from going back. Isn't there another talk at 11:30? Yes, like right now. So I'm going to take one quick question, and hopefully we can continue this over lunch. And then over time, Gabe, I would like to be.
We'll work together.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
Anybody interested in the video, I think that's the first great step.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yes.
Just more of a comment around the retraining for students. One thing that we've seen some success with some of our cohorts, the support specialist, has been, of course, like the orientation and like hearing from other students, but also implementing a mentorship program with students, where students in the cohort are paired with either senior STEM students or students from previous cohorts that can kind of connect with them and talk to them on an ongoing basis.
Gotcha.
Whether that's on a monthly basis or they're touching base at the tutoring center, but just being able to share those
Yeah.
communications. Because as a support specialist, you know, the goal is that you're connecting with all of your students, but sometimes the student's going to connect on a different level with another
sure.
student as
Yeah.
opposed to the support specialist.
Yeah. And that modeling from upperclassmen is really, really crucial. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, yeah, so we have a quick build. Oh, sorry. I should have brought a glue stick. So I have some glue sticks. We can do it right away, right? So this is the idea, and there's one magic face which will lead to success. And the other 7, you need to do some work, right? Yourself or with your students. So you're looking for what? For internal, unstable, and controllable, okay? And unstable sounds like, typically unstable is not an attribute we want, right? So this means stability in time. Unstable means changeable, right? Okay. So thanks for the construction.
Thank you.
Okay.